Hey YouTube, my previous video looked at a proof of concept for pulling in-game data. Let's extend this further to a larger scale project. A simple question, are my league teammates broke? Simply put, we want to know, are my teammates sitting on a bunch of gold when they should be backing to convert it to items? That means the objective of this project will be to determine the current gold of each player. In terms of what we need, that means we'll need to get the gold for both yourself and then each player. Now how do we get gold? Well, there's active sources, so this means killing minions, killing jungle camps, killing players, as well as bounties on said players. Secondly, there are also passive sources, so by default you get some base gold per 5, which can be modified with the support item, which gives you support gold per 5. The support quest also gives you gold, and the jungle items give you gold, I think, on camps, and there's also some stacking effects. Likewise, there's some items that give you a certain amount of kill per gold. Storm Surge is one, as well as Collector. And then lastly, there's more systematic versions of gold sources, so things like taking Rift Herald, taking Void Grubs, taking Baron or Dragon, turrets, turret plates, and inhibitors. Keep things simple, let's downscope this project. We'll keep some active sources like minions and kills, as well as some passive sources like base gold and support gold per 5. We'll look at how to address objectives, but ultimately that will be just a point of extension if you wanted to make this project a little bit more complicated. It's always good to break a project down into smaller tasks that we can tackle individually, so let's do that now. First up, we're going to get the gold for the active player, so yourself. Then we'll want to know the passive gold generation for everyone. So for doing that, we're going to need the game time and the average minion value, because that also changes on game time. Now for each player, we'll need to get some basic information about them. I've included an example of what you can expect in your all-game JSON file, so you can work through this and see what we're looking for. To keep things simple, like I discussed before, we're going to ignore junglers. For each player, we're going to take their scores, so that's their kills, deaths, assists, and minions, and convert it to gold. I'm making some assumptions here that a kill is just 300, assists are 150, and we're going to do some calculations based on the time to get the minion total gold. We'll also check their items to see how much gold they've spent, and if they have a support item. Now supports have their own income calculation. They have an additional passive gold amount. So we need to check if they have World Atlas or anything else. World Atlas gives 3 gold per 10, and Runic Compass plus the other ones upgraded have 5 per 10. So we'll need to account for that separately. With this information, we can now calculate our gold per player. So we know their total gold, which is 3B, so their score converted to a gold, plus whatever support passive gold they've had, plus the actual passive gold in game. So that's how much gold they have total. We know how much gold they've spent from their items. Therefore, their current gold is simply their total gold minus their spent gold. Then lastly, we want to display this information, so we'll produce a nicely formatted output. I've taken the code from the Riot API Bootcamp lesson in-game data and transformed it a bit to make it easier for our applications. Previously, you would make a request to the URL and return all game data with the gold for the specific active player, but we want to look at all players. So I've simply taken out down here, and right now I'm testing it with just an example, so I don't have to be playing a league game all the time. Now this all game data response is formatted as a JSON. There's an example in the GitHub for this course. It's the same one that's being used in the in-game data example, but you can see here we have active player, all players, events, and game data. This function here pulls those out, but you could also do it by simply making a call to these URLs. The documentation is on the Riot API portal. The first 2 tasks were to get the gold for the active player, which is yourself, and to determine the current time so that we can calculate the total passive gold and average minion value. For that first one, I just took the active player, pulled out the summoner name, and pulled out the current gold. You can look at the structure of what active player has here in Spider, or you could simply check the JSON, so we can see I want summoner name and I want current gold. I've also converted the time, so game time from game data, into a readable format. For the second task, we wanted to determine the current passive gold amount as well as the minion value. To calculate the passive gold generation, we know that game time is in seconds. Gold generation starts at a minute 50 at 20.4 per 10, which is 2.04 per second. Knowing this, we go to game data, pull out the game time, subtract off a minute 50, and then multiply by 2.04. That gives us our total passive gold generation at a given point in the game. Calculating the average minion value is a little bit more complicated because it changes over the course of the game. You can read the schedule on the wiki, but I've pasted it here for reference. To do our calculations, I simply check the game time and compare it to our various breakpoints, and then return the minion value accordingly. Let's see what this outputs. We can see that I had 287 gold at 17 minutes, so that's how much gold I had currently in my inventory. I would have generated 1900-ish passive gold over the course of 17 minutes, and right now, each minion averages about 23 gold. Our third task was to calculate each player's gold from the all players data. Now, junglers and supports will have a separate calculation, but generally we're going to take the all player scores and convert their kills, assists, and minions to a total gold value. We'll need to determine which players are our teammates. That's what this function here does. The first line reads in our data, and we determine who the active player is, i.e. yourself, with this line here. Note that the active player data does name and then a hashtag tagline, but the team data is just your name. So that's why I've parsed it there. Lines 70 and 71 say, alright, so find the summoner name of the active player, which is you, get their team, and then go through the team data and only keep the players that have the same team. And lastly, I've cleaned up the data to keep only the champion name, the items, the position, the scores, and their summoner name. From there, we can begin to start calculating each player's gold. So we feed in our team data, the passive gold generated over the course of the game, and the current value of minions. Before this line here, team data has the scores as a dictionary, but we want these as columns so we can work with them. This line then takes the score dictionary, converts it to columns, and then concatenates it with our prior data. We then add a column for the passive gold generation. We calculate the gold based on kills, assists, and creep score. This is a very simplified calculation. And eventually we're going to look at the support gold and items gold, but I've kept them at 0 for now. And then the last bit, we just clean up the data a little. So this is what our team data currently looks like. We have a champion name, what items they have, their position, their summoner name, some basic scoreline info, and then we've calculated the passive gold and the gold from that scoreline info. Now we want to calculate the support passive gold generation. I've created a column just called support gold and made it 0. The way we can calculate the support passive gold is the same as we can calculate the normal passive gold. So I've created this function called calculate support passive gold. It takes in game data, basically takes the time, and I'm just assuming a flat 3 per 10. You can update this to the 5 per 10 when the support quest gets upgraded, but for now we're just keeping it simple. So we have our passive support gold fed into the function here. And I'm going into our data frame and saying, find the person who's in the position support or utility, because sometimes the naming scheme is a little messed up with the Riot API. Go to the support gold column and set it equal to our support passive gold generation. Now this leaves just our items gold, which I've set to 0 for now. Now we're on 3C. We need to convert the player's items, i.e. their spent gold, to some sort of numeric value. The way I've done this is through the function calc team gold item. So we take in our team data and I pull out the items to a list. So that's this column here. We can see it's a dictionary of values. If you were curious, what this actually looks like is we're pulling out these items as an array. So there's going to be 5 entries for 5 players, and each sub-entry is going to have an entry for each item, and within each item, we're going to have the price value, and we want to sum all of these price values. That's what this list comprehension here does. For every entry in the player item, so for each player in player items, for each item in each player, take the price of each item and sum it up to a list. And then we simply take that list of the player's items converted to gold and add it into our data frame. Opening up the team data frame, the item gold values are stored in this column. Just to verify that our item calculations are correct, I went ahead and did one for Dr. Mundo. So we have 450 plus 900 plus 300 plus 300 plus 0. You get 1950. And that is ultimately what we got in our column as well. This is making a simple assumption on the support items though. In the sample data, the champion bard has a support item called Zazak's Realm Spike. The price is listed as 0, but we know from the wiki that it should be 400 gold. So I just have not accounted for this. You would need to do so in your code. Now let's put this all together by calculating the team total gold. I fed in the active player and the team data, and we simply take a sum of the passive gold plus the scores gold plus the support gold, so that's our generated gold, minus the item gold, so that's the gold we have spent. This will return the amount of gold we currently have, which is ultimately we want with the current gold field. Now we already know our own gold, so the active player gold, so I've gone ahead and overwrote the current gold column for ourselves, and then rounded the whole thing off to 2 decimal places. From our example file, this is what the end result looks like. So it shows the current gold for each one of the different positions. Just note that Riot sometimes classifies support as support and sometimes as utility, which is why I have support or utility in the code up here in line 89. I've cleaned up this data to allow us to run the code on a live game. I've used the simple functionality of name equals main and a live data flag. So if live data is true, then we're going to make a request to that Riot API endpoint, pull the data, and then parse the data the same way we did before, repeating every 1 second until the user hits an input. There's other ways you could do this. You could do it by simply making a request to that endpoint, which will fail if you don't have a live game, and have it revert back to the sample data. So that's another way of doing it. One other point, I added a flag on the jungler income because we are not really calculating it very accurately, and it spits out a little asterisk in front of the position. Before we test this, I want to point out a small bug that I forgot to include. I forgot to account for the starting gold, so I added just 500 to the passive gold. Likewise, I added in a print statement to show the current time, so we can track that in alignment with our game. I'm in a generic bots game, and I currently have about 640 gold, so let's run the program right now and see what it says. It says this game is active, we're pulling what we want, and what do you know? It says I have the about and right amount of gold, and looks like my Jax should have backed, because he has 1300 some odd gold, and let's see if that's accurate to what we see in game. Yep, makes sense, because he only has one item, and he's been farming 41 CS for the past 7.5 minutes. Now this project isn't perfect, so I want to highlight some points of future work or revisions. We did not include the gold for events, so you could check the events data for First Blood objectives. We didn't account very well for the support quest upgrade. I'm just assuming 3 gold per 10 when you can upgrade to 5 gold per 10. There's basically no calculation of jungle income, so you could add that. And the last point is more programmatic, so you could convert a lot of the code from functions into a more object-oriented structure. For example, the support calculation is just a more refined version of the normal player calculation. And there we go, a solution to Project 6 of the Riot API Bootcamp. So I have to plug it. It's my course. It teaches you how to bring yourself up from no knowledge all the way up to building an app on the Riot API, and that's riot-api-bootcamp.thinkific.com. I'll link in the description and so on. But as you can see, at least in answer to our original question, are my teammates broke? In this game, it looks like the answer is no. That's all, folks, and I hope to see you in my next Riot API exploration.